And it wasn't until I read the Ethereum white paper in 2016.
Okay.
That's when it kind of clicked with some of the political philosophy stuff that I was interested in around kind of dynamics of power and how you can never eliminate power, but you can reallocate it in different ways. And so I caught the idea of DAOs, particularly in that first paragraph. And so that's what really kind of drew me in. So I'd say mostly I found my way into it.
But it's interesting to learn that the Sherpa of Superteam found his way into crypto by reading the Ethereum white paper.
Dude, I didn't honestly even know anything about Solana until maybe like a few weeks before we started doing Superteam stuff.
So what happened? Like, what's the Superteam story?
The Superteam story is I was playing in a poker game in Singapore at the time, and we played like once a week. We played a lot, and it was like one of those like very intense poker games, where it's not as much chit chat, more like straight up gambling.
Yeah.
And there was this guy who would play, who didn't really know how to play, and he just mostly lost money at the time. And so we became fast friends because it's good to have people like that.
Right.
And I didn't really know much about him, but I was exploring another startup idea at the time. And another guy at the poker table was like, "Oh, you should got to talk to Akshay about this." It's like, Akshay, the guy who mostly just kind of like loses money. And it's like all over the place, whatever. He's like, yeah, Akshay's a real smart guy.
Yeah.
So then I talked to Akshay about it. Was very quickly impressed, as most anyone who talks to Akshay is. He's a really, really sharp guy. And then, that startup didn't work out. I didn't decide to pursue it. And I got a job as an entrepreneur in residence at a local bank called Standard Chartered. And I was telling Akshay about it because this one we kind of become friends. And he kind of shook me by the shoulders and was like, "The fuck are you doing? We talk about crypto all the time. Like, let's do something together."
Right.
So he told me he had this podcast with Tanmay. I had never heard of Tanmay or anything like that. And they're like, "Hey, we want to do something that's kind of like Solana focused." I was like, "Oh, I'd seen it. It was maybe in that period where Solana was running up from like $3 up to $200 something dollars." So I kind of was like vaguely aware the SBF tweet of like "sell me all your soul and then fuck off." So I was interested in it. But then he kind of Solana pilled me a little bit. He's like, "Yo, all the smartest developers are moving over here that we know in India. There's a real opportunity to do like usable products right now." And most importantly, I think at the time I had a real strict belief that like crypto is largely an emerging market story. And so to hear that there was an ecosystem that was really focused on emerging markets like India, Philippines, Malaysia, etc., was really exciting to me. And so it was kind of from there that we went forward. It was as much like Solana was interesting as it was that like Akshay and Tanmay were interesting, and we wanted to do something really fun together. So I was not like a diehard believer. I now really love Solana, but even still, I'm not like a Sol Maxi. I still have a bunch of ETH. I still like ETH projects.
Right. In the early days, how was the structuring like? Like, I understand it's a DAO and it's all flat, but what were the roles and responsibilities, right? And I feel like in the last 2 years, your role has really evolved, right? Like every person who's entered at different points in the last 2 years knows a different version of Kash, right? Like early on, they would have seen more of you like handling the Discord and being really active there, and now you're like the Jimmy Kimmel of like Jimmy Fallon of Solana, right? So like, how has that been like?
Yeah, so when we started, there were 5 of us. So it was me doing, I guess you kind of like call it operations, strategy, community, product kind of stuff. Akshay, who was there on kind of like strategy and product stuff as well. Tanmay and Dave, who were doing like all the kind of distribution marketing thing through like how do we position things and attract people, and then the homie Neil, as well, who's doing a lot of the ops kind of based stuff. And it was like a classic early stage startup thing, man. There was like no real division of labor. Akshay at the time had a really kind of high conviction idea that's lived to this day in the way Superteam is structured, that it's not a company, right? Like really it's just a bunch of kind of sovereign individuals deciding to collaborate on things. And like, hey, maybe we do this for 3 months, maybe we do this for 10 years, who knows? Like this is just like, let's figure it out. And so everyone just kind of like decided to rise to what they thought was useful. So at the time, I was definitely the most interested in DAOs as a concept. And so the initial vision of Superteam was to be an out and out service DAO, like Raid Guild or some of these others. And we were going to issue a token, and you need to buy the token to work with the people within the thing. And then we kind of found out relatively quickly that DAOs don't work very well, and by and large are kind of stupid. Certainly for like that type of work, like that type of kind of like project-based work, they're not as effective, I think. And I can talk about why if you're interested. But so yeah, over time then it started to evolve. So we kind of moved from being this kind of service DAO to being this general kind of like talent incubator starting in India. And then that really worked, and that we were able to attract a lot of great talent in no small part thanks to Tanmay. As well as Akshay, obviously, and his connections to the startup scene. And so I was the Sherpa. I just kind of like ran the stuff on a day-to-day basis. I talked to every member and so on.
A lot of different ecosystems, whenever they look at communities, everyone has this common thing that Solana is doing like a really beautiful job. Like that's hands down, right? And everyone wants to replicate the Superteam model. but some of them have tried to, but they haven't like gotten as far as this, right? What do you think worked out in your favor, or looking back, what were some things that were like, okay, this is what we did right and this is we nailed?
I think there's probably 3 factors for the success. And like, as anyone who's had a little bit of success knows, like, it's very hard to analyze what happened because so much of it is luck and timing and whatever else. The first thing that we had was like a really supportive partner in the Solana Foundation, so they deserve a big shout out. They, I think, uniquely among foundations in crypto, are aware that the goal is not to kind of like have more power and have a lot of headcount. They've never really been that big, and they were eager to let the community kind of rise up. So they were very open with funding us through grants, very open with helping us with connections and everything else. They really saw an importance there, so we had a great partner. Without a great partner, it wouldn't have happened. The second thing that we had was this really unfair distribution advantage, honestly. So like, when you have one of the most famous guys in the country who's got like a great overlap with your current audience, it works really well. It's hard to do it without a Tanmay-like figure early on, I think. And then I think the third thing we had was just like willingness to work hard, which I'm sure a lot of people are. But community work is oftentimes regarded as somewhat low status, I think, right? It's like always cooler to be like a dev or to be like a founder, or even possibly like in sales. And I think at the time we took community as seriously as other crypto people take product. And so that's just one example. Like, I talked to every single new member that came into Superteam for at least 30 minutes, oftentimes an hour. I led weekly lurker onboarding calls where just every week I talk about the same shit to a new group of people. We did like we had the podcast, obviously, we're putting out content constantly. And just taking really seriously the idea that like community was the new capital in crypto, and that was going to be a differentiator. So finding people who are dramatically overqualified for the work that they were doing, like, you know, not to be arrogant, but like, I'm overpaid as a Discord mod, right? But like, early on, that's what was required. Is you got to find someone to do what is ostensibly lower status work that feels like it might be below them, and have them treated with the seriousness which I would treat founding a company or building a real, you know, software product. And that was the differentiator. So if you try to find like, if you don't have like a great and open-minded partner who's willing to devolve power, if you don't have some kind of distribution edge to win in the attention economy, and if you don't have like a group of people who are willing to put in the work on things that might not be as flashy, then it's just not going to happen. You can't just like find Discord mods for $500 a month.
In the last 2.5 years, right? Almost 2.5 years is when you guys started, right? And now you've expanded to like 18 countries or so, right? Like the last ecosystem call.
Hopefully 18. But
there were 18 countries where the ecosystem call was hosted, right?
Yeah, that is right. That is true. Those are
in a way, I mean, the community is spread it throughout, right? What was that one point of time where you were like, oh fuck, this has actually gotten big? Was there like one moment of realization?
Oh, dude, I'll never forget. So the first few months of Superteam, it was all like in my laptop, right? And it's already crypto, and most people at the time were like, crypto's kind of weird, whatever. I myself was like, I don't know if any of this is real, because like, I'm obviously ethnically Indian, but I've never lived in India or anything like that. I'm not like connected to the culture. I don't speak Hindi.
Yeah, you don't like Punjabi music as well.
I'm learning to. I'm learning to like Punjabi. I love the Punjabi wedding, and, so I'm trying to get better at it. But in general, you know, it all felt kind of fake. And then it was the Delhi hacker house or the Bangalore hacker house. Can't remember which one came first.
Bangalore.
Was it Bangalore? So the first time we did a hacker house, which I think is where we met as well, right? On day one, there was like a line of whatever 500 people at like 7 a.m. And then, as you might remember, we like shut down the doors and move people out of the gates because they were like going to riot. And I remember there was people like shaking the gates. One kid I remember was crying, and I came out to try to like mollify the crowd a little bit. And that's when I was like, oh, we might be onto something. If people are like this enthusiastic, this energetic about this, then clearly this is actually working somehow. And I think after that, all of us just went and took it like 5 times more seriously as well.
Do you think there's a playbook to the entire thing, to building a community, right? Do you think there's a method to the madness? Or do you think, I'm sure like it's different for different projects, but what are some must-to-do things that you have to do?
So I think that there's definitely a playbook to building a super team. And the reason I know that is I've written this playbook. And so we have, I think, like 55 to 60 guides in it that we give to the new super team leads to help them kind of figure out how to build a super team. How to build a community in general, I think, is a little bit more challenging. Oftentimes, I think it revolves around like some broad cliches, but it's hard for that advice to be like super actionable. The broad cliches are like, figure out the purpose of your group, figure out, is it like a selection effect, like you're just collecting the best people, or are you providing a transformation effect in which you're going to take somebody and change them into something else? Because the types of strategies that you do to build the community then will be very different. You want to identify what I call like your 12 disciples, who are like the 12 people at the core of the community, so that you can very quickly step out. So like in Superteam India, very early on, it was people that, you know, like Abbas and Parag and Aditya Shetty and these guys who were able to kind of step up so that we could step out. and give it over to the community. And then it's all about kind of finding ways to kind of stoke the fire and grow it. I'd say maybe like the two counterintuitive things for community building that we found a lot of success with that are maybe broadly applicable. Number one, exclusiveness. Exclusiveness is the whole way to that's the whole secret sauce, honestly, of a super team. It happened at a time when everything was about being permissionless. Oh, we'll take contributions from anywhere. And so you'd have these discords and these DAOs with like 40,000 people in them. And nothing of value ever got done. Because if you haven't given something of value to enter a community, you're not going to treat it with value, right? If you get something for free, it's not that fun and interesting. So rather than try to build the biggest community, I encourage people to like set firm limits on how big the community can be and kick people out regularly. And this allows you to kind of model what good behavior looks like and make sure that people are kind of constantly engaged because they have something to lose if they stop being so engaged. So yeah, I think exclusivity is a really huge one. And the second is to pay just tons of attention to onboarding. This is where a lot of the human-centered design aspects came in. Of like having a real onboarding funnel of an experience that kind of goes not just like, hey, now you're in the Discord, welcome, read some text. But rather like, hey, here are some concrete actions. So when you read this, here's 3 things that you should do in 5 minutes right away. Then make sure that they talk to a person, like an actual voice conversation or IRL conversation in the first 48 hours. Make sure that they say something in the first 72 hours and so on and so forth. There's a whole list you can go through. So having a really well-structured onboarding process, I think, is the make or break for most communities out there.
It's like a personal touch that you add to it, right?
Yeah. And finding ways to do that at scale are not necessarily easy, but like the big thing is having a clear set of rules or guidelines on you're a member of this community, now what? What is the way for you to get more involved? Because the biggest thing that happens is you have this buildup of kind of like kinetic energy or passive energy. I'm not a physics guy. Whichever one is like latent energy, I guess. You're trying to change that into kinetic energy. And I think if you don't give people clear kind of guidelines on how to do that, they'll just kind of fizzle and go somewhere else, and they'll take their energy somewhere else.
The exclusive part really makes sense because in some sense, I don't want to call it a cult because it's sort of like a negative word, but it's sort of like a clique, right? Like everyone wants to be part of that cool group, right? And that's somehow like Superteam feels like that.